minor leagues. From here, we only hear stories about minor league baseball and how hard it is and the arduous and playing a couple hundred games a year. Were there ever times where you actually thought, you know what, this is too tough? I do still have to play a 150-game season, the long bus trips, injuries. Did you suffer any major injuries or have times when you really thought, you know what, I can't do this?
Not for me. I mean, I had a couple of maybe 2-week injuries throughout my career at various stages, but I never really had to overcome those sort of hurdles and work for an extended period of time in rehab to try and get back on the field. As far as it being tough, yeah, look, there's times that it was tough to get up and go to the field. At no point did I ever consider packing it in and going home, but there was definitely times going to the field and I just wasn't looking forward to going in and doing the work. It seemed like everything I'd tried hadn't helped, and what was there left to try except for going back to having fun, which was generally the best part, or what sort of helped me get out of any troubles I was going through. So it's definitely difficult, you know, from the pay to what you've got to eat and all those there's so many more things to just struggling and going 0 for 4 to deal with, living on the other side of the world. But yeah, look, it had its challenges. For me though, it sort of never really got too bad that I really considered walking away from it at all.
Yeah, I had to jump over quite a number of injuries. I had my knee was the biggest hurdle for me. I had four knee surgeries over the course of my career, and actually one of those changed the course of my career altogether. I was a catcher starting out, and I was picked on the Australian team that was going to go play in the Olympics in Athens. I was going to be the starting catcher. It was all lined up. I was in AAA at the time with the Mets. We were playing in Indianapolis against the Brewers organisation. They had a team in Indy at the time in the International League. And it was a week before the Olympics, and I had a play at the plate where I was trying to block a runner coming home. The throw sort of took me up the line and high, and this player had a late slide and hit me right in my knee and blew my knee out. So that ended my catching career basically, and ironically but not linked, the next day I was traded to the Kansas City Royals. So within 24 hours I was, you know, I don't know what I was at the time. I was a top 10 Mets prospect on the doorstep of the big leagues, going to the Athens games where, you know, fortunately, unfortunately for me, the team went on and won a silver medal, which is always in the back of your mind, you know, how it all would have played out if you were there. But yeah, in 24 hours I was, you know, sort of right in pole position. And the next day I was traded and going to a brand new organisation, season-ending surgery, had to learn a new position that off-season. I went from catching to first base, which probably in hindsight, going back as a junior, I would have loved to have taken more ground balls and fly balls, because you know, in those days you specialised early, and you played your position, and that's where you played. So I didn't pitch, I didn't play the infield, I didn't play any outfield, I just caught, and that really hurt me down the track. As a 22-year-old, I was having to learn how to play first base, and I'd never done it before. And 6 months later, I was playing in the big leagues at first base. So you want a definition of frightened? Try putting a kid at 22 in the big leagues that's never played a position before in front of 50,000 people and playing out his big league dream. So yeah, for me, injury was a huge hurdle. But in saying that, it also made me an incredibly more tenacious, I guess, and just more well-rounded player. I had to sort of reinvent myself. I was less one-dimensional. I started to look at the game differently. So in injury, there was an awful lot of benefits, and there were times I feel like I came back stronger as a result of injury as well. So that was definitely, you know, your perspective and how you look at it was definitely something that held me in good stead, despite of some obvious hiccups and obvious hurdles. But I know Knackers has got a better story than this.
I was going to raise that, of course, Michael, being a pitcher. Just recently over in the States, there's been a huge amount of Tommy John surgery, arm surgeries on pitchers over there. Did you suffer much in the way of injuries yourself through pitching?
Myself, no. Like after my first year of pro ball, it was a massive workload, a lot different. You know, I was going from relieving to starting and just trying to find my position as a pitcher. You know, after my first year pro ball, I broke my elbow. I cracked it actually, and I knew something wasn't right. And I had the off season, so I'd be in the off season right now, training, preparing for my second year, pitching in the Monarchs, playing a bit of club ball, and it just wasn't right. It was sore all the time, and I'd reported to spring training, made the high A team, and I remember 20 innings into the season, my arm was in, I was literally like crying after every game. Something wasn't right. I've had x-rays, the team doctor didn't pick it up, they didn't see it. Through a change-up, elbow, I heard a crack, come back to me through to first, and I thought my arm was going to fly off at that time. Coming off that, I remember sitting the following year, the year went through, I just struggled through the rehab, didn't fully recover, ended up having a screw put in my elbow. It changed the way that I threw. I went from throwing over the top to throwing sidearm, and I think it was my lucky charm, to be absolutely honest. It separated me from the average 5'11" righty. You know, I'd throw low 90s from the side now versus just straight over the top, straight as an arrow. You know, after that, I've had like a little bit of, you know, shoulder problems, things like that. It just comes with being a pitcher. But I remember, my third spring training, I sat there in spring training, I was on the payphone with a calling card, in tears, calling home, and I said, I think I'm done. My elbow was so sore. That was one point. Then my first year AAA, not a injury base, but a performance base. I had 12 innings, 24 hits, 30 earned runs. It was a beautiful way to, 24 earned runs, 30 hits in 12 innings. It was the best start of AAA in my life, and I was like, that's it, I'm done. And the general manager of the Twins came into the spring training, called me into the weight room, and I was like, I actually, at that time, I semi-packed my bag because I thought I was getting released. And he goes, look, I'm gonna forget everything that's happened to this point because no one's that bad. And he goes, from this day on is what I'm going to count your season on. Ended up winning a pitching award and getting a first big league spring training the following year. So he actually, you know, it was very good because he actually, you know, he stuck with what he said, and I still hold Terry Ryan to this day with a lot of esteem and a lot of respect.
I remember, I actually want to tell a story about Knackers. I think I spoke to you at some point, either right afterwards or during when you had your elbow problems, and I remember you telling a story about sitting in the hotel room, and you'd got a movie on Pt2. You've paid for a movie in your hotel room, and you stuck your elbow in the ice bucket for the whole movie and just fell asleep with it in the bucket. You know, he was in that much pain and going through that much with his elbow that he's just like banging. These are the sorts of things I don't know, they're good stories to tell now, but at the time they're like, how much do you have to go through to really, you know, overcome these obstacles, and it becomes so all-consuming as an athlete at the time, like just every waking minute's thinking about your injury and how to get better at it and how to get past it. And that story, although Knackers won't tell it all, I always remember about him, just how troublesome that must have been at the time, and how big of a hardship that would have been.
The next part of your careers, guys, was actually getting called up to the big leagues. You had spent time in the minor leagues, as we just heard. Where were you, and you know, how did you feel once you actually got the news that you were going up to the major leagues?
So we were playing in Connecticut at the time. For me, it was pretty early on in the season. It was only a couple of weeks into the season when it just so happened Jimmy Rollins went down with an ankle injury at the time. So it had happened a couple of days before, and no one had really thought anything of it. They're obviously playing all that stuff on ESPN. Is he okay? Is he not? No, he's not going on the DL. And not that I was thinking about being called up. I don't think you sort of ever really are. But it was after a game one time, and we were just back at the hotel. We'd eaten dinner. A few of the boys, it was actually funny, a few of the boys ducked out to the casino for a couple of hours, and I was thinking about it. I thought, no, I'll just hang back in the room and you know, watch baseball tonight or Sports Centre or whatever it is with the roommate. And then my manager, he called to see if I was in the room, and then he came down and he just sort of sat down, and he made me sit down on the bed. And then he told me, he said, you're going to Philadelphia tomorrow. And I sort of, at that moment, you sort of hear the words. It doesn't really make sense. I said, oh, okay, what am I doing? You know, what am I doing in Philadelphia? Type thing. He goes, well, you're not active at the moment because they're going to assess Jimmy Rollins tomorrow, but looks like they're probably going to put him on the DL, and you're going to the big leagues. So then, yeah, it's just a bit of shock. You're not really too sure. I was lucky I had that manager previously, and he was really tough on me, but he got a lot of good stuff out of me, and I really respected him. So to share that moment with him, to be able to give him a hug and my roommate a hug straight away, and then start making your phone calls back home, that I didn't sleep that night. Get to Philadelphia the next day, and we're playing the Mets on Sunday night, ESPN game, so I had no sleep. Not that it mattered. I showed up to the field with my 2 bags and trying to find. I went to the front office. I didn't know. Had the taxi driver drop me off. I just went to the ticket sales or the front office and said, oh, I'm a player. Where do I go? And so they kind of looked at me a bit stupidly, but they pointed me in the right direction. And then in the locker room, and then the GM came over to me, Ruben Amaro Jr., and told me that they were putting Jimmy Rollins on the DL, and congratulations, and here I am, a big leaguer. So yeah, it was all a blur, but can sort of recall almost everything as it happened. Yeah.
Justin, for you?
I had a funny one. I got pump faked on my first call up. So I have Mike Sweeney's chronic back to thank for like 3 years of being called up with Kansas City. He was really struggling through really a lot of back problems, and I was in AA at the time with Kansas City in the Texas League. Our team was in Wichita, and Sweeney hurt his back, but they didn't want to put him on the DL. So they called me in the office and said, you got to go to Kansas City tomorrow because, and they didn't want to tell me why. They said, you got to go to Kansas City tomorrow because the big league hitting coordinator wants to see you, right? Wants you to take batting practice with the team and just sort of see how you're tracking. And at the time, I was playing really well. I was leading the Texas League in hitting. I was doing really well. So I was like, oh, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But you know, who cares? I'll go. I'll do whatever they want me to do. So I go to Kansas City, and I took batting practice I didn't dress out with the team. I sort of just hung out in the locker room. It was weird. And just took batting practice down in the cages by myself. And then they put me in a car and sent me back to Wichita. And while I was there, I saw Sweeney's like rehabbing, and they hadn't made a move yet. And I was just like, oh, okay, this is all really suspect. And I guess within the time that I got back in the car and drove back to Wichita, he'd had another hiccup with his back. And when I got back, we were playing a game. So I got back, dressed out, got out onto the field. I think I actually pinch hit in the game. So I got out of the car and just suited up and got in the game. And anyway, afterwards, Frank White, who's a very famous Kansas City Royal, played second base right through their heyday with George Brett and all those guys. He was my manager in AA, and he pulled me in the office after the game. And he said, "Well, Justin, I know you've been been in the car and been all over the place, and all your hard work's paid off. The Royals have made a move, and you're going to the big leagues." And then he looked at me and he said, "And I want to ask you if you're a beer drinker." And I went, "Oh, Australian, mate, beer drink, yeah, I'll have a beer." Anyway, he opened up his fridge, and I sat there and cracked a beer with Frank White, which was equally as cool. But he just reeled off like about 10 big league stories in a row, just about his first time getting called up, and his career. And it was one of those special moments that still gives me gives me goosebumps. But yeah, that was my call up, and then we were in Chicago, so I didn't sleep a wink that night at all. I stared at the ceiling, and you know, my phone was just exploding. There was 1,000 messages. Anyway, the next day, you know, I get to the field, and everybody's really accommodating. They love it. They're so happy for me, and that was a very special memory. But I got in the game, and it was a pinch hit situation, and Buddy Bell, who was our manager at the time, looks down the dugout and goes, "Hubie, you're in the hole. So you know, this is it. I'm going to get my first at bat in the big leagues." So I'm starting, like, the adrenaline's starting to pump, right? Anyway, I get into the on-deck circle, and it's getting closer. I'm like, all right, this is really going to happen. Anyway, the announcer announces my name. It said, "Now batting from Emerald, Victoria, Australia, number 16, Justin Huber." I look up, and there's my massive melon on the Jumbotron. And we're playing in Chicago, Comerica Park, massive screen. And underneath, it's got "from Emerald, Victoria, Australia." It still gives me goosebumps today. And the funniest thing was I hit a weak fly ball to centre field. That was the upshot of my first at bat, but it was about a 5 or 6 pitch at bat, but it felt like I was in the batter's box for like 2 seconds, right? The adrenaline, I felt like I was in the batter's box. I couldn't control it. I felt like I was way out of control. Anyway, my agent that night calls me in the hotel. I pick up the phone. He goes, "Look, I just wanted to let you know," because he played in the big leagues himself. He was a very famous player. He calls me that night. He said, "I just want to let you know, don't worry, the game gets slower as the longer you stay up there." So it was. I thought, this is going to be way too hard. If every at bat's like this, I don't know if I'm going to be able to play up here. But yeah, it was a very, very cool, very fond memory. Yeah.
I was different. I was in Rochester, second year in AAA, and I guess it was different than the year before. I had like 40 innings out of the bullpen as a reliever, but I was second in the AAA strikeouts, so that's including the starters. So I was just like having the greatest start of a season that anyone could ever ask for. I had my newly born baby girl, my wife, and we're renting our own apartment. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know how I'm going to make next month's rent. That was the honest thing. And I was lying there in bed all night, and I'm like, you know, if I don't get called up now, I don't know if I can afford to finish this season. It's costing me to play in AAA. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like wide awake in the sweats, and the phone rings in the morning, right? And you know, I'm basically praying all night. God, something's got to happen. And that morning, the phone call rings, and we just put our baby back to bed for that morning feed. And I'm like, just don't answer it. Just hang up. And she's like, no, it could be an emergency. I better answer it. So my wife answers the phone, and it's the manager, and he's like, can I talk to Michael? And she has that hysterical look. It's the manager. And like, it's the manager. And I'm like, am I traded or released it? I don't know, you know. And he goes, Mike, you've got an hour to be at the airport. You just got called up to the big leagues. So I don't know what to do. And I don't even have really enough money to get to the airport. So I'm kind of like, what do I do? And my buddy next door, he drove me to the airport. We get there, you know what I mean? And I'm kind of like, I don't know really what's going on. And I get to the hotel, and we're in San Francisco. And I get to the hotel, and of course I start calling everybody just off the hotel phone. I'm a big leaguer now, you know. And then the next day we're checking out to move cities, and I get the phone bill, and it was pretty much my first paycheck. So yeah, that was my first experience. And then on the mound, the first time out was in San Diego. The closer was off no matter what of the situation, you know. So they brought me in the 8th inning, 4-run lead, the situation. Anyway, I ended up, my first major league appearance, I had a save. So it was very memorable. It was a very emotional 24, 48 hours. Yeah, and I think everybody has a funky twist.